So, welcome to a conversation about a topic that touches many of our lives, obsessive compulsive disorder, known to most as OCD. Living with OCD can present, unique challenges that affect both our kids and us as families. For those living with it, simple tasks like getting dressed or getting to school and getting out of the house can become really overwhelming. And for those around them who don't understand what is going on for them, the disruption to our daily lives can lead to conflict and us feeling helpless to help our kids. Join us as we hear thoughts from two different kinds of experts, one who supports those who live with OCD and one who lives with OCD, both giving us valuable perspectives that help strengthen our understanding and connection with our kids. My name is Victoria Kettis. I'm a mom. I'm a director here with Family Smart, and I'm joined by two lovely people, and I'll let them introduce themselves. Kelsey, let's start with you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kelsey. I'm a young adult living with OCD. I was diagnosed when I was 18, but I have symptoms going all the way back to age 6. And I'm just really excited to be here today and talk about my experience with OCD.
Thank you. Dr. McKenney.
Hello, thank you for having me today. My name is Dr. Katherine McKenney. I'm a registered clinical psychologist. I've had the privilege of working with young people and their families with OCD for the past 15 years. I currently split my time between the provincial OCD program at BC Children's Hospital and then in my private practice at Cornerstone Child and Family Psychology Clinic.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both for this important conversation so that we can help families get a little more understanding of just what obsessive compulsive disorder is. And I'll be referring to it as OCD for the rest of our time together. So let's start at the beginning. I know that obsessive compulsive disorder has changed how it's been seen and how it's been described and how it's been looked at. So let's start with, what is OCD?
Yeah, so OCD is a neurobiological condition that's characterized by the presence of obsessions and/or compulsions. So obsessions are intrusive, unwanted, repetitive thoughts, urges, or images that the person experiences as highly distressing. Compulsions then are those things that people feel like they have to do in order to either make those intrusive thoughts go away or to prevent a feared outcome from happening. So common examples of obsessions include things like contamination and fears of getting sick or coming into contact with germs. It may be fears of causing harm to oneself or to others, or being responsible for something bad happening to others. There can be intrusive thoughts related to religion or sex, or there could be sort of urges and needs for things to feel just right or complete. And the compulsions, common examples that we often hear from young people, are things like excessive hand washing or cleaning, but it goes much beyond that to include things like mental rituals, needing to arrange or organize things, taking lots of precautions to make sure someone doesn't act on their intrusive thoughts or urges. And in order for a diagnosis of OCD to be given, the symptoms have to take up at least an hour of a person's day, or to be experienced as highly distressing, or to be having a significant impact on many activities of their daily life. That could be work, school, relationships, friendships, whatever the case may be.
Thank you. That's a very clear summary of what exactly it is that we're talking about here. And I love that you pointed out that it's not just about overwashing our hands, that it's something that we can see in many different areas of our lives. Now, Kelsey, as a young person who's been diagnosed with OCD, what do you want us to know about what this can be like?
I think I just really want to validate that it's scary and there's really no other way around it. It is really scary to have OCD. It can be extremely isolating and impactful on the sufferer as well as those that love them. I also just want to say that OCD isn't all what it looks like in the movies and in media. And I think that that was hard for me, experiencing more OCD in my thoughts and not so much in my actions. I had a lot of compulsions that I didn't know were compulsions. So things like replaying thoughts, erasing thoughts, pushing thoughts away, checking how I felt about a thought. I at the time just thought that everybody did that. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed with OCD when I was 18 that I realized that it was OCD and not everybody does that. So yeah, I think I just want to validate that it is really scary to have it, and you're definitely not alone. And there is hope there, and there is help there as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Dr. McKenney, Kelsey mentioned she didn't think that she had compulsions. For others who are listening to this and wondering if they too might have obsessions, but not compulsions, what can you share with them?
Yeah, and there's certainly a term that's out there. It's often called pure O or pure obsessional, and that's been used to describe individuals who, experience the intrusive thoughts and are very distressed by them, but don't engage in any sort of physical or observable compulsions to other people. And so a lot of people have come to characterize that as like, well, I don't do compulsions. But in actual fact, just as Kelsey was saying, there's a whole range of things that people can do internally in order to neutralize those intrusive thoughts. Checking one's thoughts, scanning a body for signs of distress. It could be having to replace a bad thought with a good thought, counting, any kind of thing that a person is doing internally in order to make themselves feel better or to make a thought go away, we can broadly consider to be a compulsion. There's also a lot of avoidance behaviors that people with OCD will engage in. So if a person has a lot of fears of acting on an impulse to hurt another person, maybe they'll no longer go into the kitchen, or maybe they'll no longer use knives just to be safe that they're not going to act on those thoughts. So we can also think about those avoidance behaviors within that broader category of compulsions as well.
Thank you. So I know parents will benefit from this as well, Kelsey, but I know it's important for you to let us know what young people need to know about how it is for you to manage and live with OCD.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult for sure. And at the very beginning of my treatment, I remember somebody had said to me that OCD does not define who you are. And I really didn't believe them, because at that point in my life, OCD really did define all aspects of my life and controlled all aspects of my life. But I think being on the other side of it and living, I still have OCD, of course, and I will have it my whole life, but living with it being much more manageable, I think that it's really important to know that there is life beyond the depths of OCD when you don't think that you or your child or anyone that you love is going to be able to get past it. There really is life beyond the struggles of OCD. And I really truly believe that I wouldn't ever be able to experience joy again because OCD was so severe. But there really is another side to it, and you got to work hard to get there. But when you do, it's an amazing thing.
Well, how wonderful that you have found joy in the hard. I'm glad that that's where you're at now, Kelsey, and that you can be here with us to talk about it in such a hopeful way. So knowing that, what do families need to know? What would you like families to know as they support their kids, knowing what it was like for you when you were younger?
Yeah, I think education is a huge thing. And thinking back to my parents, that was probably a big catalyst of change for them, was just learning about what OCD is and how it affected me. I think they came into it not knowing, or just knowing the stereotypes of contamination and hand washing, which is, of course, not all of OCD. So I think that education is a huge thing, and even parents' willingness to listen to this that we're doing right now, I think is a huge step into wanting to understand what their child is going through. So yeah, I think just a willingness to learn and be open to hearing what your child is experiencing, I think is a huge first step.
Thank you. So if parents are seeing obsessive compulsive behavior in their child, Dr. McKenney, or their youth, how can they begin talking about this with them in a way that's helpful?
So I'll often coach parents to have a conversation with their child at a time when there aren't a lot of distractions, when there aren't a lot of stressors going on in the moment, and just share some of their observations. Like, I've noticed that at bedtime, you seem to be getting out of bed quite often to check the locks, or I've noticed that you've been going into the bathroom to wash your hands much more than you used to. And I'm wondering if you're having any sort of thoughts or worries about what might happen if you don't do those things. And sometimes just opening up the conversation that way can help kids start to disclose, well, actually, I'm worried about someone breaking in at night, or I'm worried that I might throw up if I don't wash my hands. And once we can sort of understand it more, suddenly we can reduce some of the shame or stigma or secrecy that often accompanies OCD. And then we can start that process of starting to push back against the OCD. So that's often like a first step. I also like to encourage families to externalize the OCD. And one way to do that is very simple changes in the language that we use. So for younger kids, I'll often encourage parents to work with their child to come up with, a name for the OCD. I've had some most amazing names over the years of kids that have come up with. I think my favorite might have been a young person who called their OCD Donald Trump. I thought that was very appropriate. But anything where you can inject a little bit of humor, a little bit of fun with it is great. But the main purpose behind externalizing it is for everyone in the family to be able to view OCD as something they're all on the same team fighting back against, right? It's something outside of the child that we can then direct our efforts towards. Older teens often tend not to be that keen about giving it a funny name, but even just calling it the OCD, right? I see that your OCD is really giving you a hard time right now. Even that subtle shift can really help us look at OCD in a slightly different way. The third thing I'll often coach parents to do is use what we call supportive statements. And this comes from the work of Dr. Elie Leibowitz at the Yale Child Study Center through his SPACE program, which stands for Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. It's a great acronym. But it really is a combination of providing validation for the child's distress in the moment, while also conveying a parent's confidence in the child's ability to cope with what they're dealing with. So that might sound like something like, I can see that the OCD is really giving you a hard time in this moment. And I also know you're strong enough to get through this, right? So it's that combination of that too. And the reason why I like it is that we are really mirrors for our children in terms of how we speak and how we act. And if kids look to us and see us conveying that confidence in their ability to cope, that helps them see themselves as competent and very capable in terms of pushing back against the OCD. It is not easy, as Kelsey has mentioned, but it does set the stage for being able to start to push back against the OCD.
And something everyone can benefit from doing with competence and confidence. And what a great step for parents to be able to take. So once parents are seeing that this is impacting their life in many areas, what are the steps parents should take to get support for their child?
Absolutely. So I think when kids and teens are exhibiting sort of mild symptoms of OCD, there are some wonderful resources out there that parents can start to use right away. There's some lovely workbooks. The International OCD Foundation website has some amazing resources, and it can kind of walk you through the steps of, how do we name the OCD? How do we start to develop ways to push back gradually and slowly? And for many families, that's often enough at that stage. For youth who are experiencing more moderate to severe symptoms, it is very difficult for parents on their own to put these plans in place. And I think because at that point, the symptoms are just having that much more impact in the family's life, the symptoms are just that much more entrenched, that it's really hard to make those changes without sort of an outside support person helping you guide along that process. So in that case, next steps might be a family connecting with their family doctor to explore possible options. It could be a self-referral to the local child and youth mental health team. It could also be connecting with Foundry, who provides services for those 12 and up. And for those families who are interested in pursuing more private options, the International OCD Foundation website maintains a list of clinicians who have gone through their quite intensive training program in terms of how to deliver the evidence-based treatment for OCD. Because I think that's what's really key, is connecting with a therapist who is experienced with OCD and experienced with the treatment protocol.
As families, it can be natural for parents to want to fix and make things easier for our kids. And with OCD, this might look like parents and other family members making accommodations. We often hear accommodations are being made. Or changes to how we do things at home so that we can help them. And honestly, to help us cope too. So what do you want parents to know about making accommodations and changes at home? And can you share some examples of what accommodations look like?
Absolutely. And what I'll say is that accommodations are the norm when we're talking about OCD. I have yet to meet a family who has not made some kind of change to family routines or household expectations or just their schedules in order to manage the impact that OCD has on their lives. So for any parent out there who's feeling like they're the only ones, I can promise you that is not the case. But accommodations really are anything that a parent or caregiver does in order to alleviate the child's distress related to OCD, or to prevent the child from becoming distressed in the first place, or to shorten the compulsions in some way. And the intention behind engaging in compulsions is good. You know, it's really a parent's drive to make their child feel better. But also, as you mentioned, we have to get out the door in the morning. We have to get to bed at a good time. We have to be able to get to work. And so sometimes these accommodations are just a way for us to be able to continue to function. And it's really easy to get pulled into this trap of accommodations because they work in the moment, right? They reduce distress. They help us get out the door. The problem is it gets us locked into this cycle where parents end up having to do more and more accommodations over time. They become more complex. And sometimes parents don't even realize, you know, with the insidious nature of accommodations, suddenly how different their lives look now compared how they used to look before OCD moved into the house. And what it does is it really perpetuates the cycle of OCD. So although it helps in the moment, it actually contributes to the maintenance of OCD over time. So really common examples of accommodations that we hear from families are things like having to answer the same question over and over again, providing excessive reassurance, no, you're not going to hurt anyone, yes, you have OCD, no, you're not going to get sick, right? Of just over and over again. It may be doing things like facilitating rituals, like providing youth with the necessary things they need for their washing or cleaning compulsions. It might be doing the compulsions for the child. So you don't have to get out of bed and check the door. I'll go downstairs and make sure the front door is locked for you, right? The list is quite endless in terms of what accommodations look like, but really it's anything a parent or caregiver wouldn't typically do if OCD wasn't in the house.
Okay. Kelsey, what do you want us to know about accommodations and that they may support parents and caregivers in their understanding of their child's OCD?
So when I was in the depths of my OCD, I really didn't believe that my parents and family were trying to help me, because they had learned quickly that they needed to fight back against the OCD. So I would beg for reassurance and they would refuse to answer. And I would try to avoid people and places and they would make me face it. So they learned very quickly, thanks to treatment, that they weren't allowed to accommodate me anymore. So yeah, it's really difficult. And I think that it's normal for kids and teens to push back when parents are trying to not give into accommodations. It's difficult for everybody. I imagine it was very difficult for my parents. And I know for me, in the depths of my OCD, it felt really wrong to go against my brain and everything that it was telling me to do, because deep down it thought it was trying to keep me safe. So it's only human nature to push back against that. But I think the only way out is through, and you have to face your fears. And I think having a support team around you is really crucial to help you face those fears.
Thank you for that acknowledgement of how hard this must be for parents. And always grateful that you're all here attending this so you can learn from these two experts. Kelsey, for parents who are just starting to figure out how to help their kids, what are some examples of helpful strategies that parents can use to begin to help modify their behavior?
Sure. Yeah. So I think I was talking to my parents about this actually because I was curious what their journey was. And the two things that they said to me were education and support. So like I said before, just educating yourself on anything you can. My parents attended so many workshops and so many treatment programs and so many family support groups, and just anything that they could get their hands on to try to understand what it was like for me to live with OCD. I think that's really important. And then the other one I think is for my parents was getting their own support, whether that be from each other or from family or from their own professionals. I think as much as it wreaked havoc on my life, I know it affected them as well. And I think it was really important for them to maintain their own schedules and their own lives, despite how much OCD was in our home. I know that it was really crucial for them to remember that they had to do things for themselves as well, and not focus so much on my OCD. And then I also think, like Dr. McKenney said, externalizing your OCD and making it not a part of who you are really takes away the power. And I think it takes away the blame and the shame that I felt when my parents first would group me with my OCD. And then when they learned that it was something to externalize, I think it really took the power away from it being so controlling of me. And it was just like another member of our house. I think that's really important as well.
Yes, I like the statement Dr. McKenney made about how OCD came into the house, and it's definitely not you. And this thing that we need to be able to look at differently. So thank you for that insight for families so that they can begin to their journey to learning what it is they need to do for their kids. So our kids just don't spend time with us at home. Of course, they spend a lot of time at school. And school and learning in general can be especially challenging for kids who have OCD. Is there something schools can do to help our kids? And how can we as parents work well with them to have things go well for our kids?
You're so right. OCD really can affect all aspects of young people's lives. And at school, we see that show up in very specific ways, again, depending on the kind of symptoms that they have. But common things young people tell us about is they just get very distracted when they're sitting in the classroom by their intrusive thoughts, or they're fighting so hard to like resist sitting next to a triggering student, for example, that they're not focused on the lesson at hand. Or for someone who has a lot of just right symptoms, they might be spending hours and hours working on homework because they're erasing and rewriting over and over again. Or they might be so concerned about cheating or lying in class that they're having to redo homework or take extra precautions to make sure they wouldn't cheat in some way. So it really is quite a burden in terms of the child being able to demonstrate their knowledge in school. And that's where I think parents can talk with the school around what kind of temporary accommodations can we put in place. Now, these are very different from the accommodations we were just talking about in terms of things that caregivers might do in order to alleviate distress. When we're talking about school accommodations, what we're really talking about are things that the school can put in place to reduce the burden of OCD, to allow the child to shine and really demonstrate their learning. So common accommodations that people often find helpful are, can I have extended time on tests, for example? Can I write my quiz or my test in a separate private space where there's less distractions? Can I have extended deadlines for handing in assignments? Because if I'm up till 1 o'clock in the morning erasing and rewriting, it'd be really nice to know I didn't have to hand it in the next day, that I have a little bit more flexibility in terms of when I could hand things in. We've often even had teachers been able to just say, I'm just going to mark whatever you can do in class, right? Rather than allowing them to spend hours and hours doing homework at home, which we know is really just a way of ritualizing. So really it's about working with the school around what temporary accommodations we can put in place. And I say temporary because as a child engages in treatment and begins to build their skills and their capacity to push back against OCD, that's when we can gradually start to pull back on these sort of academic accommodations, because hopefully they won't be needed as much.
What a great goal for a school to have with a family is, how can I help this child shine? I love that. So when I think about the steps, we've talked about how we can begin to support our child, how we can talk to them about it, where we need to reach out. Of course, one of those pieces is therapies and medication. Can you share with us what treatments and medication exist for OCD?
Yeah, the evidence is very clear on this. In terms of therapy, it's cognitive behavioral therapy. And with under that umbrella term, there's a particular emphasis on something called exposure and response prevention, or ERP. And this is where we gradually, in a very mindful and systematic way, support the young person to face their fears, really, to put them in the situation or be near the triggers, which bring on the intrusive thoughts. And then we support them to ride out that distress without engaging in the compulsion or the avoidance behavior that they've been using. And what happens with practice, lots of practice, and over time, suddenly the urges to engage in the compulsions will start to go down. The thoughts will become a little less triggering. And eventually we get to the point where if a intrusive thought pops up, the young person gets to a point where they can say, I see you, OCD, and I'm moving on. The goal of ERPs is never to eliminate the intrusive thoughts, because sadly, we don't have control over what thoughts pop into our mind. And the more effort we put into trying not to think about something, the more we're going to think about that thing. So really, treatment is about leaning in to those intrusive thoughts and getting used to them. In terms of medication, what we know to be most helpful would be SRIs, so serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And there's a range of medications in that class that have been found to be helpful. And sometimes people require both. And the thought is, when someone needs both medication and therapy, the medication helps to turn the volume down on the intrusive thought to allow the young person to engage more fully in the ERP activities.
Great. Well, we've heard some of the therapies and things, Kelsey. Can you kind of bring some of these to life and what that can look like and how they helped you?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's all about facing your fears and whatever that looks like. Throughout my time in treatment, there is a wide variety of exposures, very creative. I think people are very creative when it comes to their exposures and what they need to do, but things like touching a surface that you might think is contaminated, hugging a family member that you have intrusive thoughts about, refraining from rewriting something or rechecking something. I really think the possibilities are endless of what an exposure can look like. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of creative ways to think about doing exposures. And I think OCD just makes life so small. So the point of doing exposures is to help open up your life again and make it like maybe it was before OCD came into your life, or just a new way of living. But yeah, exposures is definitely the way to go to get through OCD, as hard as it is in the moment for the sufferer and those that are witnessing it. It's a really difficult thing to go through, but it's needed.
Thank you. Earlier, Dr. McKenney, you talked about facing your fears and then moving on. And Kelsey, you have definitely shown us beautiful ways to move on and be able to be here to talk about it in a way that others can learn from and others can gain insight from. So thank you. Any final thoughts, Kelsey, that you'd like to share with families and caregivers before we move on?
Yeah, I think I just want to end it, like I said before, with just that the hope is real and there is help out there. As hard as it is right now for you and your child, it really does get better. And it's a lot of hard work and a lot of long days, often 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but it really does get better. And there's people out there that want to help and are willing to help. And if you as a sufferer are willing to do the work, then amazing things can happen.
Thank you. Dr. McKenney, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Maybe just to share with families that, it's not their fault that their child has OCD. They didn't do anything to deserve having this. And they are the most important part of the process in terms of pushing back against OCD. And if there is one good thing about OCD, if I can phrase it that way, is that it's highly treatable. And so just to echo Kelsey's sentiment, that there's reasons to be hopeful that things can change.
And what a wonderful way to end. Thank you both for being here with me today. Thank you to all of you who are attending and watching this video for making time for yourself, for your kids and family to come and learn with us today. We know how hard it can be to make time for things when things are hard. So we hope your time with us strengthens your understanding and helps build connection with your kids. Be well, everyone. Take care.